Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Milda Matachunaite. I lead VOC's efforts on coalition building and fellowship programs. It is my honor to welcome you to the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation and Free Russia Foundation discussion on the plight of the Kremlin's political prisoners, the event that is dedicated to the International Day of Political Prisoners, which will feature substantive updates by top experts in this field. This event will give a voice for those who can no longer speak for themselves and will include an interactive exhibit featuring photos and quotes by prominent political prisoners held by the Kremlin. It is my distinct honor to now invite Dr. Lee Edwards, the founding chairman of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, to deliver opening remarks. Dr. Edwards.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Milda. What I would like to do is to have you join me in praising certain brave men and women, all of whom are recipients of the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom. And I begin with Elena Bonner, the eloquent widow of the Russian Nobel laureate Andrei Sakharov. Also, Wei Jingxing, leader of the Chinese pro-democracy movement, survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre, and 18 years in the Laogai, the Chinese gulag. Václav Havel, the Czech playwright and founder of the human rights organization Charter 77, and leader of the Velvet Revolution. Lech Walesa, founder of the Solidarity Union movement that enlisted 10 million Poles. Armando Valladares, who spent 22 years in the Cuban gulag for criticizing Fidel Castro. Harry Wu, sentenced to 19 years in a forced labor camp in China for questioning what? The Soviet suppression of the Hungarian Revolution. He did that as a high school student. Vladimir Bukovsky, human rights activist and author who survived 12 years in the Gulag, including so-called treatment in psychiatric hospitals. Father Thaddeus Nguyen Van Ly, sentenced to 15 years in the Vietnamese Gulag for supporting the pro-democracy movement in Vietnam. Oswaldo Paya, murdered by Castro agents by demonstrating for human rights in Cuba. Jimmy Lai, the Hong Kong publisher and philanthropist, sent to the Laogai for life for supporting the democracy movement in Hong Kong. And finally, Father Georgia Edelstein, the Russian Orthodox priest, sentenced to the Gulag for refusing to support the Russian war against Ukraine. All of this is as background for what we are here for this afternoon. And we honor this afternoon one such brave man, in particular, Vladimir Kara-Murza. And it's my honor and my privilege to introduce the chairman of our panel discussion, Natalia Arno. Natalie is the founder and president of the Free Russia Foundation, dedicated to civil society and democracy in Russia. Ms. Arno worked for the International Republican Institute's Russia office for a decade, until the Putin regime warned her to leave her homeland or face 20 years in prison for treason. Well, Mr. Putin's threat was a big mistake, for it reinforced Natalia's determination to promote democracy and human rights in Russia and to start the Free Russia Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and my privilege to welcome Natalia to the Victims of Communism Museum and to lead today's panel discussion about political prisoners in the Kremlin. Ladies and gentlemen, Natalia Arno.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee Edwards. And thank you to everybody who is attending our event today for not being indifferent, for caring about political prisoners. We have an amazing lineup of speakers today, but also we are going, some of us are going to become voices for those who are behind bars at the moment, for those who cannot speak, who cannot be with us. But of course, we care about them, we think about them. So throughout the discussion, we'll be reading their quotes. They are the ones why it's very important not to equate Putin's regime to Russian people. They are the ones who are very brave and heroic, and actually the most optimistic among all of us. Also, let me say my special thanks to the Victims of Communism Foundation for opening your doors today, when we know that you are always closed on Mondays, but at the same time, with this event, which is called the Plight for Kremlin's political prisoners, we couldn't even imagine to hold this event in any other venue, because today is a day of remembrance of victims of political repression and also the International Day of Political Prisoners. And yesterday on October 29, it's usually a day-long ceremony, annual ceremony initiated by Memorial many years ago, which is called Restoring the Names, when people read aloud names of those who were executed as part of Stalin's Great Terror. And as far as I know, like this, yesterday there were such ceremonies in at least 34 countries and 80 cities. And when Putin's regime is over, and we all hope it's sooner than later, we will also be remembering, of course, all the victims of Putin's regime as well. It's a crazy number to think, but it is estimated that there is over 1 million of political opponents, dissidents, academics, human rights activists, journalists, and others worldwide imprisoned for their commitment to democracy, human rights, and freedom. Last year, Congressman Steve Cohen, co-chairman of the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the Helsinki Commission, the special representative of political prisoners at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and the Commission's ranking member, Congressman Joe Wilson, introduced a resolution recognizing October 30th as the International Day of Political Prisoners. October 30th was chosen because on October 30th, 1974, Soviet human rights activists and dissidents initiated the idea of marking the Day of Political Prisoners in the USSR, and consequently held a hunger strike that day while in jail. In particular, this idea belongs to Soviet prisoners of conscience, Leonid Lubarsky and Alexei Murzhenko, held in one of the harshest Soviet prisons in the Republic of Mordovia. They wanted to draw attention to the plight of thousands imprisoned in the Soviet Union on political or religious grounds. In Moscow, the Political Prisoner Day was announced at a news conference by prominent dissident Andrei Sakharov. This initiative proved resilient, and October 30th was marked by coordinated hunger strikes in political labor camps every year until the end of the Soviet Union. This year, Russian political prisoners Alexei Navalny, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ilya Yashin, Vadim Astanin, Daniel Holodny called other political prisoners and their supporters to hold a day-long hunger strike as protest against repressions and to bring attention to the issue of political prisoners. To show solidarity with those behind bars, my colleague Evgenia Kara-Murza, who's also wife of a political prisoner Vladimir Kara-Murza, and I are holding a hunger strike today too. And Dr. Lee Edwards mentioned Helena Bonner, And so I'm pleased to tell you that our first speaker is Tatiana Yankelevich, who sent her audio to us. She's a daughter of Yelena Bonner and stepdaughter of 1975 Nobel Peace Prize winner and the most famous Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov. She's a retired educator in the field of the Second World War II history and the Soviet human rights movement. And she focused her efforts on the cause of Andrei Sakharov and also edited and translated part of his work. So Dmitry, please, let's listen to her.
Hello. In September of 1977, on the day my family left the Soviet Union as persons deprived of the Soviet citizenship, my husband, Evgenia Kara-Murza, smuggled in his underwear an appeal to the Helsinki Accords Belgrade Conference on Soviet human rights compliance. It was an appeal from the inmates of the Mordovian Gulag, a statement on the conditions and treatment of political prisoners. The risk if Yankelevich too, that signed the Helsinki Accords in 1975. Much has changed since then, both good and bad. The Soviet empire of evil is no more. The political prisoners who survived those times were released. Much hope was given by the late 1980s, 1990s democratic reform, by the emergence of democratic grassroots movement, by the founding of the Memorial Society and Sakharov Center and Archive in Moscow, and other NGOs preserving the history of political persecution and the memory of its victims. Today, the Memorial Society, the Sakharov Center, other NGOs have been declared foreign agents, evicted, and liquidated as parts of the intellectual and moral resistance to the ever-repressive anti-constitutional regime in Russian Federation. Many devoted human rights activists were forced to flee Russia under the threat of unlawful and increasingly cruel persecution. They continue their essential work in the virtual space, as the public space in Russia has shrunk to almost zero. Many others chose to stay in Russia, and they have faced increasing persecution, arrests, torturous conditions in pre-trial detention and in the places of deprivation of freedom. A traditional roundtable on the Day of Political Prisoners was founded by Vladimir Kara-Murza, the Sakharov Center, and the Memorial Human Rights Center. It will be hosted today by the YouTube channel called after Andrei Sakharov's 1975 essay, My Country and the World. Today, Vladimir Kara-Murza is also a political prisoner. Today, the Russian power system calls into question the constitutional principles of separation of powers and judicial independence, the presumption of innocence, and equality before the law. Transcending this is the criminal and unconscionable aggression and the destruction, the bloody devastation brought by Russia onto the independent and peaceful Ukraine. Ukraine defends not only its independence, but also a common and universal system of values, at the center of which are freedom and human rights. Today, on October 30, on the Day of Political Prisoner, as we bear witness to crime against humanity committed by Russia, we have no right to forsake those who are paying for their opposition to the criminal war, those arrested and convicted for their thoughts, faith, public position, and civic activity, wherever they may be. Their number is constantly growing. Since 2014, the number of political prisoners in Russia has increased 15 times, from 40 to 600 people. Today, propaganda in Russia and in many other countries as well is fast at work, erasing and controlling the memory of terror. As it tries to justify modern repression and war crimes, it is more important than ever to work for the liberation of all the political prisoners, regardless of their citizenship, creed, or ethnic identity. As Sakharov apologized in his Nobel Peace Prize address to all the prisoners of conscience he failed to name, I ask forgiveness of all the victims of the criminal regime in Russia and wish them courage and strength. May our commitment to their freedom help them keep hope.
Sorry. It was an idea of Mariana Katsarova, UN Special Rapporteur on Russia, to include Tatiana to this panel, and I think it's very, very relevant and appropriate. Let's try our interactive exhibit of photos and quotes. Let's start. Who's having Alexei Gorinov? Yes, thank you. So Alexei Gorinov, 62 years old, a Moscow municipal deputy, activist of Solidarity movement. He was one of the first to be sentenced for the so-called discrediting Russian army, and he was sentenced to 7 years in jail. He's quite sick, but he's very adamant in his fight. So please, could you read this his quote?
I want to admit my guilt, the guilt before the long-suffering people of Ukraine, before the entire global community, the guilt, in fact, that I, as a citizen of my country, was unable to prevent the ongoing madness. I'm asking for forgiveness also for the fact that apparently I will no longer be able to do anything to stop it. I say this on behalf of my compatriots suppressed by the fear of repression, from whom I have been receiving many letters in support. The very possibility in the 21st century to initiate criminal cases similar to mine, the possibility of today's judicial investigation is a disgrace to our country. All of these have already happened in its history, based on the lessons of our shared past. In the view of the inevitable future of Russia, I am already acquitted.
Thank you so much. Thank you for becoming voice for Alexei Gorinov today. Our Free Russia Foundation, like our very first program, unfortunately, we still have this program, is advocacy on behalf of Ukrainian hostages of the Kremlin regime. And of course, back then, in 2014 and later, the majority of them were Crimean Tatars. Now we have also a lot of POWs, civilian hostages, children. But one of the quotes we prepared is by Nariman Jalal from Simferopol, Crimea, 43 years old, father of 4 children, a journalist, teacher, deputy chairman of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people, sentenced to 17 years on charges of preparing a diversion of the gas pipeline in the village of Perivalne. So, thank you.
I am accused of crime against the foundation of constitutional order and state security, but I am convinced that no one inflicts more damage to the state than corrupt and irresponsible officials. Law enforcement officers covering up their crimes with their own criminal action. Prosecutor fulfilling the FSB's order for illegal prosecutions. Dishonest judges who give these prosecutions the semblance of justice.
Thank you so much. We'll continue with our program. And we have here Sergei Davidis, head of political prisoners program of the Memorial Human Rights Center, the organization that is and monitoring political prisoners, the ones who give us all these numbers. And so my first question to you, just maybe very briefly, 5 minutes, because we have a very long lineup of speakers. Like if you can compare what are the latest trends, and especially after the full-scale invasion, and can you compare the political imprisonments and repressions of the later years with the Soviet repressions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. We gathered to honor political prisoners in modern Russia, to express our support to them, our solidarity with them. And there are a lot of them, unfortunately. Only in our lists, there are now 609 people. It's a figure for today, but if you compare it with situation a year ago, it shows 25% growth. And among those 609 people, for sure, there are some prominent, well-known fighters for democracy and human rights, like Vladimir Kara-Murza, Alexei Navalny, Ilya Yashin. But there are also many not so famous people who also fought for their dignity, for better democratic Russia. But I think the most part of those who are in our list are people who are prosecuted just for exercising their rights, often religious rights. There are Jehovah's Witnesses, there are peaceful Muslim people, and they are deprived of their liberty only for that. And for sure, our lists are absolutely incomplete, knowingly incomplete, because we include people in this list only when collect information about the prosecution, can analyze it, and prove that the case meets the criteria of political prisoner. But total number of political prisoners is much higher, and we can state it for sure because, for example, only there are only 11,000 Ukrainian civilian hostages in Russia at the moment. Unfortunately, we do not know anything about the most part of them. Only 10% of them now have their cases in the courts, but these courts are absolutely not meeting the minimal standards of fair trial, so it's impossible to get any information from these cases. There are more than 100 cases. There are more than 100 cases of Ukrainian prisoners of war charged with terrorism, war crimes, and so on. And we believe that probably they also are political prisoners, but their cases are also absolutely non-transparent, and we cannot get any information about the proofs and exact charges. There are more than 80 people who were charged with state treason or espionage or confidential collaboration with foreign country. Only in this year, it's an absolute record for all the last years, and all these cases are secret. We cannot get any information about them. So in spite of the fact that we believe that they mainly are political prisoners, we cannot prove it. And I do not speak about those who are charged with terrorism and sabotage for getting fired to conscription stations or some sabotage on railroads, because the case also is very difficult for research, for consideration, but we know that sufficient part of them are prosecuted, been charged unlawfully, and even often tortured. But generally, all this suppression of all this repression are directed to suppress civil society in Russia, to control civil society, to frighten Russian society as whole, because it's a precondition of control of our society. And for sure, it would have been impossible to unleash this war of aggression if preliminary in advance the state hadn't eliminated the structures of civil society, haven't imprisoned the most prominent leaders of opposition movement and civil society. And we see that the state has to increase the level of repression because the Russian society still resists. And it's very important to express solidarity with Russian political prisoners, to support them, because it's not only domestic issue of Russian society, it's an issue of also security, future security and peace in Europe region and even wider. Two words. And it's important not only for political prisoners themselves, but it's very important for them, for their families, but it's also important for those who think the same way as they do, being in Russia, and who faces the threat to be taken to the prison after these people, and they, due to this solidarity with the political prisoners, these people can feel not so frightened as the state wants them to feel. And it's also important because political prisoners support and solidarity with them is the main direction of public activity, of Russian civil society nowadays. Actually, Russian civil society is now united around the framework of political prisoners' support. And we see the growing level of this solidarity and this support. And it's very important that the political prisoners, Alexei Navalny, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ilya Yashin, and others, attracted attention to this day. And Alexei Navalny somehow transferred political resources of his organization to human rights issue, to human rights theme, topic. And it's very important for all of us to support this initiative. And I think this support will grow further. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergei. We'll continue being the voice for those who are behind the bars. Our next person is Yuri Dmitriev, a colleague of Sergei, who is from Petrozavodsk, who is 67 years old. He is a historian, a chairman of the Karelian Memorial, sentenced to 15 years. We know for what? For telling the truth about the Soviet crimes. So please.
Yuri Dmitriev, we have been timely vaccinated against imprisonments. How many thousands of criminal cases have we read through? And how many bearers of real camp life have we met? This is what allows us to keep our composure, not to give into panic or pessimistic moods. A prison term is not a bullet. It will end someday. Of course, I would like to end it sooner, but it's up to God. All right, once we're out, we'll continue. Take care, don't give up, keep working.
Thank you. Yes, very optimistic also. Next is Dmitry Ivanov, 24 years old, from Moscow, programmer, also of the Telegram channel Protest of the Moscow State University, sentenced to 8.5 years for disseminating the false information about the Russian army.
Our misfortune is inability to take initiative and find like-minded people. We're used to following leaders and waiting for instructions. Don't wait, act, volunteer, help refugees, support political prisoners, form horizontal connections, get to know your colleagues, peers, set common goals and achieve them together. Don't walk by when someone needs your help. We love to repeat the words, Russia will be free, but Russia is us, and what will become depends only on us.
Next is my dear friend and colleague, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is sentenced to 25 Stalin-era sentence for his telling the truth about the war, for working for an undesirable organization. Yes, he has been opposed to the Kremlin's regime. He is a politician, a journalist, a historian, father of 3 children. Yes, thank you. Ilya, please.
I blame myself for only one thing, that over the years of my political activity, I failed to convince enough of my compatriots and politicians from democratic countries of the danger of the current regime in the Kremlin poses to Russia and the world. Today, this is evident to everyone, but at a terrible cost, the cost of war. However, I also know that there will come a day when the darkness over our country will dissipate. That day will come as inevitably as spring follows even the coldest winter. And then our society will open its eyes and be horrified by the terrible crimes committed in its name. Even today, even in the surrounding darkness, even sitting in this cell, I love my country and believe in our people. I believe we can walk this path.
Thank you. But the next speaker won't be Evgenia yet. It will be a member of European Parliament, Andrius Kubilius, the standing rapporteur on Russia. Also the initiator of the United for Ukraine initiative at the European Parliament, the former Prime Minister of Lithuania, our very big friend and advocate at the European level. I know that European Parliament adopted the resolution today on political prisoners, and just generally like many resolutions on political prisoners in Russia and Belarus. And so maybe you can tell us about the EU level strategies that can be used to exchange for high-profile political prisoners, or how to put more pressure on these dictatorial regimes. 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Andreas.
Well, thanks a lot, Natalia, and really, it's a big honor to be part of this ceremony. Very symbolic, very touchy, and in some way tragic, but I would call also with strong optimism. We shall win, all of us. That's the message which I hope we can repeat here, because we are really fighting for that. Together with Vladimir, with Ilya, with Alexei, we are fighting for a different future. And it's very symbolic that today we have this gathering, traditional one, in this place in Museum of the Victims of Communism. Because if you look more broadly into the history, world history, and history of Russia, we can say in a very simple way, it's difficult to imagine what damage to the world history, to the world people, communism brought, during the 20th century. We can name, personal victims, national victims, country victims, and so on and so on, starting from Holodomor, our occupations, our people sent to Siberia, our people who perished in the fight against occupation. We lost as Lithuania 1/3 of our people after occupation. And definitely, we cannot forget that if to calculate, numbers of the victims of communism, perhaps Russia and maybe China would be, the countries which suffered the most. And in some way, what we see today in Russia with Putin regime, still that is a consequence of communism regime. Still Russia is, struggling to overcome, struggling in a, from one side, very aggressive and tragic way, Ukraine is suffering, all of us were suffering. But of course, personally, political prisoners are, suffering the most. And they, again, in some way, not directly, but the victims of the same, communist regime. And that is why, really, today we published a statement of members of our own parliament in support for devoted to this day and to personally to political prisoners whom many of them we know personally, like Vladimir, who always we were together till the last days of his arrest in all our fights against the war in Ukraine and so on and so on. The same with Alexei Navalny, with Ilya Yashin, with many of those others. And definitely knowing what they are suffering, perhaps for us, it's difficult even to imagine what they are suffering. But nevertheless, we can try to understand. The question today is very clear. What can we do? How we can help? How we can help personally them? How we can help Russia? And of course, whatever it's needed to be done, we need to do. If there is possibility to exchange of high-level political prisoners, we need to do that. But the biggest service would be, of course, transformation of Russia, which they are fighting for, even being in prisons, which we are fighting for, because that is the goal which is needed not only for Russians themselves. Somebody spoke here that this is very much needed also for all of us, because transformation of Russia to normal country is the only way how sustainable peace on the European continent can be established. If not, then we shall always suffer this, post-communist, aggressive, neighbor, with all the danger not only to us but to our kids and our grandkids. So that is why, definitely, first of all, Ukrainian victory is, the most important goal which we need to achieve, because that is how the window for transformation in Russia can be opened. And I'm absolutely sure that Putin regime will collapse in one or another way. So that is what makes both Russian civil society and us in the West, makes us to be ready for such a change, not to lose this opportunity, not to allow Russia to suffer anymore this consequences of the communism, and I would say at the end, that we have the whole list today, whom we are, remembering, and on for whose freedom we are fighting. We have the whole list of real heroes, and not just heroes, for Russia or heroes of Russia, but worldwide heroes, like Vladimir Kara-Murza, like Ilya Yashin, like Alexei Navalny, like all others. And I'm absolutely sure that their struggle is also our struggle. And at the end, all of us, we shall win. Mandela at some time also was, not just a hero for South Africa. He was a global hero. And because he became a global hero, he won. And he won the battle for South Africa. The same will happen with Russia. We have global heroes. We have clear goals, what we need to achieve. And that goal is very simple. Freedom of Russia. And freedom for the whole democratic world from that terrible Putin regime, which we can see as a consequence of communism. Thanks a lot to everyone.
so much, Mr. Kubilius, for always supporting us, believing in us, in our cause, and for being here today. We'll continue being the voice for those who are behind the bars. And our next person is Alexei Moskalyov, a 55-year-old entrepreneur from Tula region. We all remember Alexei and his daughter Masha with her anti-war drawing. Please.
From a letter by Alexei's daughter, Masha. I love you very much and know this. You're not to blame for anything. I always stand by you and everything you do is right. I believe that everything will be fine and we will be together. I hope for the best and love you very much. Please, just don't give up. Believe, hope, and love. I am proud. Yes, Dad, I can say that I am proud of my father. Proud, smart, handsome, stubborn, and who loves his daughter so much. Love you, you are a hero.
Thank you so much. Next is Alexei Navalny, 47 years old, from Moscow, a Russian opposition leader who in August was sentenced to additional 19 years in jail, who was poisoned with Novichok in 2020 and arrested in 2021 upon his return to Russia. Please.
Okay, thank you. In order for a new, free, wealthy country to be born, it must have parents, those who want it, those who wait for it and who are ready to make some sacrifices for its birth, knowing that it's worth it. Not everyone has to go to prison. It's more like a lottery, and I drew that ticket. But everyone should make some sacrifice or effort.
One more, it's also our friend Andrei Pivovarov from St. Petersburg, Open Russia, again in jail for 4 years for working for an undesirable organization.
The fight is against the future. People who are now advocating for progress, for change of power, for an end to military operations, want a better fate for our country, a worthy future. And it is this very future we're being deprived of. The higher the level of oppression and the more prohibitions, the bigger a chunk of our future is taken away from us. I love my country and believe it deserves a future, to move forward and not to slide back into the past. And even though those advocating for the future are now being trampled and imprisoned, I know progress cannot be stopped. Positive changes are inevitable, and they are just around the corner. See you in our new, desirable, and open Russia. We will break through.
We are very lucky today to have two rapporteurs on Russia, and today we have with us Mariana Katsarova, the UN Special Rapporteur on Russia, and you've been working on our region for many years, you know everything and everybody, but what is different now, what is happening now in Russia compared to your other experiences, and what do you see as a key role for the UN in fighting for human rights and advocating for political prisoners in Russia and Belarus, everywhere? Thank you.
I'm so moved to be for the first time in this Museum of the Victims of Communism. I lived through communist times. I was born in Bulgaria during communist times, and I think we should have such museums, alive institutions, because the victims of communism are continued to be seen today. I mean, the repression that started in Russia during Stalinist times is continuing today. It's only more sophisticated. And we see it in the faces and in the voices of all the political prisoners from Russia that are with us today. So thank you for the privilege to be in this museum and to be with you today. You know, I was thinking that, of course, this commemoration of political prisoners in Russia began a long time ago, and of course it was called a day of remembrance of the victims of repression. Yeah, and now there was a call from Mr. Navalny, but from others as well, to call it a day of the political prisoner, the 30th of October. And that's very important because in today's Russia, the history and the memory, the historical memory is also on target by the authorities. It's not only the people, it's the very memory of generations about what happened to the victims, who were the victims, and what really happened during the big terror, the Stalinist repressions. I really today wanted to remember among all these political prisoners, Yuri Dmitriev, the historian who received 15 years imprisonment, and only for actually uncovering and speaking about the unpronounceable Sondermach mass grave from the Stalinist terror, for writing a book about it, for speaking about it. And he's also, of course, the head of the local Memorial. Memorial, the human rights organization that is now one of the more than 600,000 closed down, forced to close down Russian civil society organizations. The memory by the Russian authorities targeting of the memory of the repressions is, of course, connected to their desire to install a repression and similar terror, but in a different way, now in the 21st century. It's a more sophisticated methods. Everything is used in Russia to stifle civil society and successfully close it down. There is no official civil society in Russia anymore. I included all of this in my report, in my first report to the United Nations, which I presented first in Geneva at the Human Rights Council last month and last week at the General Assembly of the United Nations. Why is that important? It's important because of the United Nations system. This is the first such report on the human rights situation in the Russian Federation ever, since the beginning of the United Nations, because this is the only first mandate, which I'm the mandate holder now, which is focusing on the human rights situation inside the Russian Federation. And I think this is a great achievement of civil society who have been advocating for this mandate. And I think how I see this mandate is to be the voice for the civil society, for the dissidents, for the brave Russians who are not afraid to speak out, who are still inside the country or they're outside the country in exile, but continue to speak out and to fight for human rights. Today, on this day of the political prisoner, to be the voice and to be the bridge. I see my mandate as a bridge. I'm just coming from the State Department. I was meeting on the highest level, the American government today, but also meeting, of course, at the United Nations, other governments in Europe, meeting governments everywhere, and trying to advocate to them special care and enabling of the Russian civil society, human rights defenders, to be able to do their work, the ones who chose to be clandestinely inside Russia, but also the ones like you who are in exile. And I'm seeing here two brave lawyers who are in exile, but they have networks of lawyers, Karina Moskalenko and Vadim Prokhorov as well, who have networks of lawyers inside the country. And I was telling the US authorities, why is it so important to fund and to continue supporting in all means the ones that are in exile, because they are the ones protecting as well the ones that are inside. And now the crackdown on lawyers is no less severe like the crackdown on independent media, on journalists, on human rights defenders, activists. As you know, human rights defenders could be anybody in any profession who is fighting for human rights. Activists, lawyers, musicians, medical people, they're all human rights defenders if they do something for the victims and for protection of human rights. So you know that it's very fashionable at the moment to kind of hate Russians, hate Russian language, And I think we as human rights people, and in this museum, which demands only truth from us and nothing less but the truth, we need to say some uncomfortable things. They're not politically correct, but they are the truth. And I've been saying to governments, you would do the biggest mistake if you isolate the brave Russians that are actually fighting for human rights. They're risking their lives now. If you isolate the Russian people, if you don't give scholarships to young Russians to come, I'm one from communist Bulgaria that came actually when the Berlin Wall just fell. I'm class of 92 of Columbia Journalism School. I came on scholarship with the competition to this country, and it changed my life because I have a different perspective. Not because United States society is better than other societies, but it's a different society with different rules. And actually, the country whose leaders 75 years ago came up with the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which we're celebrating 75 years this year. So if the world managed then to sit together after this draconian war, World War II, with so many victims on all sides, to come up with this dream document of equality, of human rights, I have hope that today we're not worse than the people 75 years ago. So I think it just needs to be implemented because it's still a dream document. But it gave birth to the UN international conventions. And this is a body of international law that actually could keep us intact and in track, and all governments, how they protect human rights around the world, and expose the perpetrators of these human rights violations and demand justice, in Russia included. Do you know, we have to say that in the Museum of Communism, there are currently about, I read, 110 monuments of Mr. Stalin in Russia. And 95 of them were built during Mr. Putin's long reign in power. And we're talking about victims of communism, and we're talking about the historical memory that is now targeted to be destroyed. New textbooks are written where, the history is rewritten, and the current history of the war on Ukraine is also rewritten. And the special classes for children where actually Masha, the one that you read just now, was, objecting to and draw her picture, and her father is now detained. There are special classes, the classes about the conversations about the important, and the important is, to talk hatred against the Ukrainians and justifying the war as some imminent attack by the Ukrainian side on Russia, and just really trying to rewrite even the recent history of last year and how this war began with, this full-fledged attack against the neighbor, against the Ukrainian people. I think when I said that we shouldn't, and this is what I'm telling governments, we shouldn't isolate the brave Russian people. I'm often asked, well, you're brave Russian people. Only 20,000 anti-war activists were detained for 1 year, but Russia is 150 million. And I was just saying at the State Department, but you have to be very sophisticated in how you read what's happening in Russia. It's not about numbers. And the Russian government is, masters in how to not only master the propaganda that they're feeding their own people, but the propaganda that they're feeding the world. So I think they operate on exemplary cases. I mean, they just do one case of Vladimir Kara-Murza, who only for speaking out against the war in Ukraine, for speaking for democracy and human rights, received 25 years imprisonment. They do, other cases like Mikhail Afanasyev, a journalist who wrote about a bunch of Russian police officers who refused to be mobilized to go and fight and kill Ukrainians. He, the journalist who wrote about that, received 5 years imprisonment. So tomorrow, somebody would think twice if they're a journalist, whether they would write this story. Somebody who wants to tell the truth publicly, like Vladimir Kara-Murza, will think twice whether to do it and receive 25 years imprisonment. This is how we survived communism. We were internal immigrants. Not everybody was brave to speak up. We were listening to the Radio Free Europe that the authorities were trying to silence. So I remember this noise to this date, trying to silence us, the radio station that we were listening just to know what's happening in the street in our city, because there was no truth, there was no information. And I think the Russian society is getting to that point. But I think we as international community have to understand statistics by the propagandists of the government about how many people are against or for the special military operation. So there is a statistic, official Russian government statistic, 85% are supporting the special military operation. And then what journalists do from Western countries or other countries, they take this number and they say, look, everybody in Russia is supporting the special military operation and the war, but that's not true. Because first of all, if I'm stopped in Moscow or anybody else and asked, do you support the special military operation? What would I say? Do I want to be 25 years in prison? No, I don't. And it's healthy and normal to be afraid. I'm really worried about people that are not afraid of anything. It's not normal, it's not human. Fear is a normal human quality. Anna Politkovskaya, my friend, was afraid. And we often spoke about that. And I said, God, you're so brave. She was killed 17 years ago, but she was brave. She was brave beyond belief, but she was afraid because she was a human being. She wasn't just some superhero from a comics. And the Russian people are afraid. And some Russian people do believe the propaganda because, honestly, I sometimes watch and I regularly watch the First Channel. It's good. It's a very good propaganda because, I've been trying to analyze why the Russian propaganda is so good, because they take a little bit of the truth, just one little grain of truth. And then they blow it out of proportion, and then it becomes the truth, because as we know, if it's repeated one lie, so often, I have to finish, so often it becomes the truth. But we shouldn't, as international community, give them that grain that they could blow out of proportion. We should be enabling the civil society. We shouldn't just have a carpet approach. All Russian citizens are not allowed in our country because they're Russian citizens. Well, among these Russian citizens are Vladimir Kara-Murzas of the world and Alexei Navalny's and Anna Politkovskaya's. And we really need to nurture them. We need to nurture them because we're foreigners. I'm foreigner. I don't want until I retire to be working on Russia. Hopefully the Russian people themselves will be taking these principles of democracy and human rights and working on their own country. And now they're outside Russia, the majority, and we need to help them and we need to nurture them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariana. Yes, it's again a huge honor for us to have UN Special Rapporteur on Russia, you, and also Standing Rapporteur on Russia, yes, as the European Parliament, it's great. But now we have a good lineup of women, voicing those who are in jail. So next is Alexandra Skochelenko, who is facing up to 10 years in jail for changing the price tags, please.
It turned out that I represent everything that the Putin regime is so intolerant of. Creativity, pacifism, LGBT, psychoeducation, feminism, humanism, and love for everything bright, ambiguous and unusual.
Thank you. The next is Natalia Filonova. She's a 62-year-old pensioner from my native Republic of Buryatia, who is sentenced to almost 3 years for being against the war. Please.
Russia will be free, but to fight for freedom, look how much blood was shed in Ukraine. I believe that this terrible period will end and there will be a completely different situation in the country. Today, people are oppressed, destroyed. Sooner or later, people will realize their human dignity, feel oppressed, and take to the streets. The democratic path is behind us. Also, we had such opportunities. They are gone today. Either we will turn into herd or we will still stand up.
And also, Lilia Chanisheva, a 41-year-old politician from Ufa, who was headed Navalny headquarters there and sentenced to 7 and 5 years.
Being a politician is also a profession. Therefore, for me, admitting guilt would be like a teacher admitting guilt in being a teacher, or a doctor admitting she's a doctor. I wouldn't have gone abroad even now. If I had any regrets after the verdict, it was definitely not about staying in Russia. Answer the question: do you live better now than you did 10 years ago? If your answer is no, take action, and you can change your life for the better.
Our next speaker is Evgenia Kara-Murza, my colleague, Advocacy Director, Free Russia Foundation, wife of Vladimir Kara-Murza. But I'll ask Zhenya to be very, very brief because we have more speakers coming. Yep.
Thank you very much, Natasha, and thank you all very much for coming here today. It is a great privilege for me to be sharing this panel with such amazing co-panelists, and honestly, it's quite intimidating as well. We're here today because the 21st century Russia, as mind-boggling as it sounds, has hundreds and hundreds of political prisoners, because our friends and loved ones are behind bars and holding a hunger strike today in protest against political repression in the country and in solidarity with all those who have had to face the bloodthirsty regime. We're here today because, as tragic as it is, in the 21st century Russia, we're yet again commemorating the Day of Political Prisoners. In August of this year, Natan Sharansky, a famous Soviet dissident and human rights activist who spent 9 years in Gulag, wrote this post on social media. 2 days ago, the Court of Appeal in Moscow heard the case of Vladimir Kara-Murza. As expected, the so-called judges stamped a sentence lowered from above, 25 years. As expected, Volodya delivered an excellent speech. Look at the power of the speech and its moral clarity. President Reagan once said that communism would find its place in the dustbin of history because it was contrary to the nature of people who wanted to be free. Many in the West condemned him for such an quote-unquote irresponsible statement back then. Today, Vladimir says the same thing, not from the White House, but from a Russian prison where he's supposed to be kept for 25 years. But the term of this regime is much shorter. It is crucial that while Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ilya Yashin, Alexei Navalny, and many others are in prison, the world remembers and talks about them every day. Otherwise, their lives will be in danger. I am saying this from my personal experience. Today, in Russia's Kafkaesque reality, memoirs by Natan Sharansky, Vladimir Bukovsky, Andrei Sakharov, Elena Bonner, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and many other former Soviet dissidents and political prisoners have yet again become one of the top trending literary genres in the country and are being used as survival manuals by modern day political prisoners. In her memoir, Alone Together, Yelena Bonner wrote that, and I quote, academician Sakharov considers publicity the main weapon in the struggle for human rights. In that sense, I'm a faithful and consistent student of my husband, end of quote. Well, I stand behind and can relate to every single of these words. And I talk because words are my only weapon. I tell stories, the stories of those who represent the conscience of my nation, of my people, the stories that deserve to be known, and the voices of these people deserve to be heard. Alexander Skochilenko, Alexei Moskalyov, Lilia Chanisheva, Andrei Pivovarov, Alexei Gorinov, Mikhail Krieger, Maria Ponomarenko, Evgeny Bestuzhev, Svetlana Petrichuk, Evgenia Berkovich, Nikita Uvarov, Azat Miftafov, Dmitry Ivanov, and hundreds of others. As Vladimir's and my daughter Sonia wrote in her school essay on political prisoners, and I quote my lovely, lovely daughter, Putin is trying to make them feel unheard and unseen, and we must make it known that we see, hear, and stand with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I'll ask my esteemed speakers of the first panel to switch seats with Karina, Vadim, Anna, and Emin. Thank you so much. And meanwhile, we'll continue voicing those who are behind bars. So the next one is Ilya Yashin, a 40-year-old politician co-founder of the Solidarity Movement, who is in jail for 8.5 years for telling the truth about Bucha.
Please don't fall into despair and remember that this is our country and it is worth fighting for. Be brave, do not retreat in the face of evil and resist. Stand up for your streets, for your cities, but most importantly, stand up for each other. There are many more of us than it seems, and together we are a great power. As for me, don't worry. I promise to endure all trials, not to complain, and to walk this path with dignity. And you, please, promise to remain optimistic and never forget how to smile, because they will win the moment we lose our ability to enjoy life. Thank you.
The next is our good Ukrainian friend and colleague, human rights defender Maxim Butkevich, sentenced to 13 years for using prohibited means and methods of warfare. Please, Maxim.
I would like to express my gratitude to all those who care about my fate and the fate of all Ukrainian prisoners of war who are currently in a difficult situation. I became even more interested in human rights issues, the penitentiary system, and Article 3 of the European Convention. There will be a lot of work to do when, God willing, I am released.
Thank you. So we continue our panel. Alexei Navalny is in jail for 1,015 days now, with additional 19 years in jail just recently. I'll ask Anna Viduta, the head of the US division of the Anti-Corruption Foundation International, to speak about Alexei and others. Thanks.
I'll be really quick. Let me paint a picture for you. Alexei Navalny is now in Shizo. This is a small box, 2.5 meters to 3 meters, concrete box. The light never goes off. There is a, medically insane person in the next cell who is crying 24/7 for Navalny to make sure that he is sleep deprived. And it's now his 21st detention in the cell box. And when he's out of it, it's gonna be he'll spend the time in it 236 days. Just imagine how much it is. Nonetheless, over this period in Shizo, he was able to spread some of his thoughts, and I'm just going to provide you with 2 quotes of Navalny. Russia must leave Ukraine alone and allow it to develop the way its people want. Stop the aggression, end the war, and withdraw all of its troops from Ukraine. Continuation of this war is just a tantrum caused by powerlessness, and putting an end to it would be a strong move. And another one, just a very recent one, but although he quotes it all the time. Evil wins when good people sit idly by. The idea that being neutral, claiming to be apolitical, or just staying out of things is often a cover for laziness, cowardice, and bad intentions. It's the main reason why small groups of organized villains have been able to manipulate millions throughout the history. 3 of Navalny's lawyers are in pretrial detention right now. I just want to name their names again: Vadim Kobzyev, Igor Sergunin, and Alexei Lipser. And for the reason that Vadim Kobzyev was not able to, leave any quotation behind before he was detained, I'm going to quote his favorite quote from the movie called The Cloud Atlas. He even has it on his Twitter account. The nature of our immortal lives is the consequences of our words and deeds that go on and are pushing themselves throughout all time. Our lives are not our own. From womb to tomb, we are bound to others, past and present, and by each crime and every kindness, we birth our future. On that note, I would like to tell you that the Anti-Corruption Foundation, along with support for political prisoners memorial project, and with support of Media Zona and Over the Info, have created a right to a political prisoner bot. And on behalf of the anti-corruption, I urge you today, on this day of political prisoners, to find the time to write 1 or more letters to these political prisoners, because this would be the act of kindness, and this will be something that will definitely bring support and attention to their causes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. We don't have too much time, so I'll probably ask Emin, son of Gubat Ubadoglu, an Azerbaijani scholar, human rights defender, and political activist, who is now in July of 2023 was arrested in Azerbaijan, remains in custody, to say a few words about your father, but 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. My father, who was an economist, former Net Fellow, Rutgers professor, and current London School of Economics scholar, went back to Azerbaijan with my mom. My mom was beaten by 8 police officers, and my dad was thrown in prison. Today is his 100th day, and he has lost 30 pounds. And currently, I just got the news that they have upped his insulin shots from 18 to 22. In 1 week, last week was 12, now it's 22. He has run out of all of his pills, and now they're keeping him conscious by giving him more insulin shots at a time. And this is the reality with dictatorships. Once we don't act in time, they become bigger and bigger, and their skins get thicker. My father, only thing he did was point out the mistakes of the Azerbaijani government. He was working with EBRD and World Bank and so on, just to show that maybe not to steal that much money, maybe give the people the right to vote, maybe give the people the civil rights. He wasn't a politician, he was an economist. He was just doing his job. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I hope your father and all the political prisoners are released as soon as possible. We'll read one more quote by Mikhail Krieger, who was sentenced to 7 years. While being on a trial, he sang a Ukrainian song, Червона Калина. Please.
I am accused of 2 Facebook posts that were just 2 years old at the time of my arrest. From this, I conclude that these texts of mine were just a pretext. I'm being persecuted for my initially anti-war and now openly pro-Ukrainian position, which I not only do not hide, but try to demonstrate as widely as possible and at every convenient opportunity. I consider this war one of the rare conflicts where the truth is entirely on one side, and that side is Ukrainian, trying in some way to wash away the fratricidal shame that our country has brought upon itself. I helped Ukrainian refugees and expressed my sincere hope for victory in every possible way on social networks. I was and still am convinced that if Russians are destined to meet freedom, it can only come as a result of this very victory, just as it came to Japan and Germany as a result of martial law.
Thank you. So we have here Karina Moskalenko, leading Russian human rights lawyer, who's also working on the report on Belarus. So we already spoke about Kremlin's political prisoners, including Ukrainian hostages of the Kremlin regime, about political prisoners in Azerbaijan. Maybe a few words about Belarus political prisoners. They are now up to 1,500. And of course, about your colleagues, the lawyers who are now also being persecuted. But please, three minutes. Thank you.
3 minutes is not enough, but I will try. Thank you, Natasha.
Okay.
Thank you, Natasha, for organizing this event. You know, it's very touching for me because I am from communist, from that of communism. And I started my career, it's not a career, it's a lawyer's mission in 70s when we had a lot of victims of communism. But we ourselves, we were victims of communism. That's why it is so important for me today to speak in this event. Today, we have a new sort of political prisoners, different sorts, but I especially would like to emphasize today those my colleagues, lawyers who are in prison now, who could be in prison if, let's say, Ilya Novikov or Ivan Pavlov would not be in another country. They would be most probably arrested. I'm not saying about my neighbor here at the panel. There were some of our lawyers who was mentioned already today. I would not repeat, but please, all who can remember and who can send the solidarity letters to him, remember about Dmitry Talantov, the president of the Udmurtskaya Bar Association, who is now in prison. He certainly is in prison because of his professional activity in the case where he replaced so-called espionage case, where he replaced Ivan Pavlov. But the pretext was that he was so angry with the actions of the army in Bucha and other places. So the formal pretext was his anti-war statements, but in reality, he was attacked. Irina Gag, she was certainly arrested if she, thankfully, she left Rostov-Don, and she kept traces and evidence, physical evidence of torture of Mr. Berezikov. And everybody remembers about Berezikov. He died in prison because of this torture. But she was accused that his suicide was committed because of her lawyer's activity, who was trying to save him. And the question for today is, are lawyers who are doing all this work today in danger? And the answer is yes. And then the second question arises, would it bring any result, acquittal judgments, things like that? No, the question is no. Then the third and the main question would arise, should these lawyers continue to work in Russia? It's probably not so obvious for everybody, but for me, I'm practicing law in my country 47 years. They have to stay there. And I'm so jealous that I cannot go today to prisons, to my political prisoners, Alexander Shestun, Ahmed Barakhoev, and all our Ingush clients, all our clients in case which called Novaya Velichia, today prohibited organization. The last I would mention some of our Muslim clients who never ever committed crimes, but they received from 18 to 24 years in prisons. It's unimaginable. And I pray, my dear colleagues who still have the opportunity to work in Russia, please work. Try to avoid political statements until you can tolerate, but please go to them, to courts, to prison. It is not true that you are not helping them. You are working as real lawyers and defenders of human rights and political prisoners. Sorry if I was.
Thank you, Karina. Very briefly, a few quotes. Sergei Vedal, who was sentenced to 7 years just for a phone conversation.
Sergei Vedal, he said, you have never seen anything like this. Even the Germans in the Great Patriotic War, they didn't do it. It wasn't like this. There were children there, so many children being killed.
Thank you. Also, it's impossible not to read the poem of Artem Kamardin. Was Artem?
Nature didn't create neither tanks nor bombs nor nuclear missiles. Nature doesn't send draft notices, doesn't send 18-year-olds to certain death, doesn't erect in memory of the best killers majestically absurd monuments.
Vadim, last but not the least, you've been defending Boris Nemtsov for many years, Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ali Yashin, many other, those who are political prisoners. What is the latest? What all of us can do to help them? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm a member of the lawyers team of Vladimir Kara-Murza, Ali Yashin, and other Russian political prisoners. As you know, 1.5 months ago, Vladimir Kara-Murza has been transferred to the Omsk strict regime colony number 6. Unfortunately, this colony is widely known by its strict conditions for the prisoners. And just immediately after the arrival to the strict regime colony, Vladimir has been pushed down to the so-called SHIZO. Anna has already told about the conditions in these disciplinary cells, some kind of prison in prison. And today I have bad news from this strict regime colony, because my brave colleague, Sergei Safronov, who is also a member of our lawyers team of Vladimir Kara-Murza, was not allowed to visit Vladimir on formal reason. I'm absolutely sure on the files ground that the cells for lawyers' visits allegedly are overcrowded just today on Monday. I'm absolutely sure that it's a cruel and clear violation of Vladimir's right on legal help, and right on legal assistance. And you could imagine that today, International Political Prisoners Day, the lawyer of the most prominent Russian political prisoner was not allowed to visit him. Tomorrow, our brave colleague will try again. And if this problem will not be solved, no doubt we'll put forward application on the situation, and it's necessary, and maybe any other, maybe international legal tools to try to solve this problem. So it's very important to keep connections between the political prisoners and their families outside world, because all of Soviet dissidents, for example, Vladimir Bukovsky, Natan Sharansky, and many others always told that for the political prisoners is the most worst thing is to be forgotten. And so many of my brave colleagues continue to stay in Russia and courageously work to help political prisoners. For example, my colleagues Maria Ismont, Anna Stavitskaya, Mikhail Birykov, and some others. They provide constant daily legal assistance to their defendants, defend their legal position, appeal illegal court sentences and law enforcement decisions, and show Orbe the absolutely illegal nature of cases against their clients in Russia, and insist on providing medical assistance to the prisoners. In other words, the heroic daily work of lawyers in Russia helps political prisoners in Russia survive. And so I'm absolutely sure that their struggle for their clients, for their usually for their friends, it's a struggle for the future Russia, for the future safe world. And the future of Russia and world depends on all of us. Thanks.
Thank you so much. The last quote by Victoria Petrova, a manager of 29 years old who is facing up to 10 years in prison just for several of your social media posts.
I demand an immediate cessation of all hostilities and international investigation of all committed crimes. I urge everyone to fight for peace, for their rights, to do everything to stop this monstrous war. Right now, hostilities are taking place, people are dying. A mad dictator is brandishing nuclear weapons. This is a critical moment when we need to unite and act. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
Thank you. Yes. And the famous Russian journalist Natalia Rostova will read the quote of Zhenya Berkovich, please.
In our country, the real truth about the war has never been voiced. It has been this way since May 9, 1945. Not for nothing did the frontline soldiers and those who went through the war dislike talking about it. The grandfather from the poem is my grandfather Lev, who as a child went through the blockade. We knew from him in general terms about the legendary piece of bread in the ration, about something else, but the real truth about the blockade has never told us. They cherished us, neither he nor his mother, my great-grandmother. The cult of victory did not arise out of the blue. It arose precisely because the truth about the war was not told for a variety of reasons from the very beginning. This memory was already gone, and on the absence of memory, on the absence of truth, anything can grow. For example, what is happening now.
Vadim already remembered this famous quote of Irvin Kotler, the former Canadian Justice Minister, who is an international human rights lawyer and represented most prominent prisoners of conscience, such as Nelson Mandela and Natan Sharansky, who said that prisoners' worst nightmare is the thought of being forgotten. So let's not forget them. They are there fighting for us. We cannot stand still until they are all released. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Let's adjourn. Thank you.